So, shameless plug. I'm working on a Cyberpunk 2077 documentary that kind of takes everything I've learned about that game's pre and post launch development over the last few years working on videos with Mike over on Deconstructing the Game. And in the process of kind of closing the book on that game that's brought me, honestly, a lot of entertainment and has allowed us to create a lot of fun content, I'm looking for my next big and broken game. And let's just say, whenever Bethesda releases a game, being a lover of things big and a little broken, I come a-running. Much like with Cyberpunk 2077, by playing the game in sort of a broad but shallow slice, I was able to kind of see how some people could have a good experience with it and others could have a pretty negative experience, depending on what you're doing and how you're approaching it. So without being a review, this video is about that. Engage! The first thing that I would say is an almost general rule for Bethesda games at launch that also served me well with Cyberpunk 2077 is the longer that you can avoid doing the main quest line and give them a chance to throw patches at it, the better you will serve yourself. And in general, this is just because the main quest lines in these big RPGs have the most segments to get broken, and when your game file gets broken and becomes impossible to complete, it's very frustrating to most of us. But beyond that, for Starfield, the main plot just is really not very good, and I've kind of found it to be an ongoing trend with Bethesda that the side content is usually better than the main quest line. But in Starfield especially, the main quest line really kind of feels like a string of lazy cliches from popular sci-fi with not much of its own to offer. I don't really know what they can do about that with patches besides significant rewrites and recording a lot of new dialogue to kind of spice it up, or I don't even know. But in general, I found the side content, though, even more than has been a trend in Bethesda games, was a lot better than the main quest line and kind of made up the difference for me. And approaching the main plot will turn you off pretty quickly to this game if that's all you do is try to just finish that first before you approach the side quest, whereas leaving it behind as much as possible and looking into some of the other larger quest lines. Like, I found that doing the Crimson Fleet plotline as a double agent for the UC Vanguard was one of my favorite things. I thought it was done better than the sort of similar Thief Guild quests in past Bethesda games, because rather than these people for some reason mysteriously trusting you even though none of us are trustworthy people, it's clear that nobody trusts you. Everyone is just desperate to accomplish their own goals and they're all trying to use you. And so in the end, when you decide, who you're going to double cross and how, it's sort of this, satisfying of you're just the last person standing and all these people who thought that they were the smartest and were gonna double cross everyone else and be the last person standing in the end, and instead you got to have the last laugh. And I found that very satisfying. And also there was this part where it's fun to just mess with dialogue. I highly recommend doing that as an aside, because I asked this lady to just give me the card to the thing I was going to steal, and she did, and it was pretty much hilarious, honestly. And these are the moments that really kind of make it fun to play, and a lot of that is really missing in the main plotline, which falls kind of flat in my opinion. Beyond just untracking the main quest line, I found that actually putting all the Constellation members back in the lodge and not even having them on my ship or at any of my outposts made a lot of difference for me as well, and kind of recruiting my own ragtag crew with their own different backstories, because the Constellation people will constantly remind you of and nag you about the main plot. And a lot of these other people are actually pretty interesting and have pretty cool backstories and more dialogue than you would think at first. The longer you have them on your crew, they get new dialogue options and actually tell you stuff about themselves. Like, for example, Lyle will pay off of his family's debts and get his family's farm out from under the corporation that was taking advantage of them. And it's pretty cool seeing their development without having to go and do a whole bunch of stuff. They just kind of provide flavor, and I felt it had a sort of Firefly-esque feeling with the crew I put together of these three characters, of Lyle, who's sort of he's a rough and tough mercenary with a heart of gold, and then I had Rosie, who is an aspiring doctor that needs experience in space before she pursues a job on a space station as a researcher. And so she's kind of going out and seeing the galaxy for the first time. And also Jessamine, who is she's kind of like this, experienced smuggler like a very Han Solo-like character, but that, is secretly has her own honorable code and everything, and it immediately changed the flavor of the game and made it a lot more enjoyable. Just their different banter as I went around and did all these different side quests, instead of being constantly reminded about the main story and the plot lines of the Constellation characters, which I found just much less interesting in general. It can be really tempting to fill up your ship crew and outposts with the main plot characters because they generally have more abilities and better stats than all of the other random people that you can recruit. But I have found, just ignore stats and prioritize fun in general, which brings us on to our next point of, rather than just going out and trying to get the biggest, most powerful, most number-one ship you can as quickly as possible and wrap your brain entirely around the ship customization system, I find that just try and get something that feels like home and is fun, and then go from there and slowly build on it and tweak it. But just kind of, make do with a ship and fly around with it, because it's really not that hard to win the basic ship combat in the first 20 hours of the game. So you can really just kind of get the feeling of flying around and not worry about trying to master every skill and decide every single thing as far as which perks you're going to take for ship building, and just kind of, get the feel for a ship and get one that you like before you really invest in it. Another thing you should absolutely not do playing Starfield is just randomly wander around and explore planets. Now, I know this sounds incredibly counterintuitive, because not only is this the first thing you would want to do in a wide open space game, but past Bethesda games have taught us that you discover the most interesting stuff by randomly wandering around. But the thing about this is just part of how Starfield is designed. Every single place you land that is not part of a predetermined quest location is going to be just procedurally generated terrain and locations that are all going to be identical every time they're generated. So besides a little bit of variation in terrain color and things like that, you're basically going to see the same thing on every planet, and that's where you get that experience of a lot of people talking about that. It's only the locations that are generated by finding a document or starting a side quest that are going to have any sort of hand-touched arrangement of assets and a few unique lines of dialogue on the NPCs there. Otherwise, it's going to be very monotonous. So it's really something to be aware of, that you just don't want to go around and randomly land on planets if you're looking to be entertained by what you're doing. Similarly, I found that obsessing too much over my combat build too early wasn't necessary. The game has a pretty fair loot grind, and it usually gives you good enough equipment that you can pretty well shoot and grenade your way out of most situations if you don't have the most optimized build in the world, unless you're on the absolute hardest difficulty settings. If you're not obsessing over having the perfect build and the perfect ship, then you might as well put your first few outposts in places that are just plain cool and make you feel like a badass space explorer, rather than trying to have the maximized, resource production and all that. So this is my first outpost, and it's around Captain Star, pretty much just because it's called Captain Star and my handle is Captain Limbless, and because it looks cool. The scenery here reminds me of an oil painting inspired by Dune that my uncle had in his basement, where I was first introduced to tabletop role-playing game, and that makes me feel good. And I would say making yourself feel good, should be your primary objective usually when you're playing games. So, putting your first few outposts in places that just kind of look cool and make you feel cool every time you see your ship take off, definitely worth that extra little hit of endorphins it gives you. Those are my broad stroke impressions and suggestions on how to have a good time with this game. I have already found some pretty interesting things poking around with console commands and messing with this game, so I'll probably do more content on it in the future. But I kind of want to just leave with, you may have noticed that one of the big words recently is vibes. And I'm actually, surprisingly, for someone entering middle-aged, I'm pleased with one of these new words of the decade, because I feel that, sort of understanding that concept of the word vibe will help us reconnect with having fun with stuff and being less jaded, because it does come down to that. It's about the vibe. It's about how things make you feel, is what you're trying to get out of things that you supposedly enjoy. And reconnecting with that and kind of pushing past the jaded nerds that stop us from having fun, even when that nerd is yourself stopping you from having fun, I think helps us a lot. And part of that for myself at least, is when I was a kid, we just didn't have that many games. We didn't live in an area where every single game came to the stores, and there was limited inventory at the rental stores. So we played a lot more imperfect games, and we managed to have fun somehow. And I think that our standards of when a game isn't perfect, we just throw it away in disgust and don't even come back to it. And again, referring to Cyberpunk 2077, I can't even count how many people said to me, oh hey, this game is great now, I wish that I had picked it up again 6 months or a year earlier, instead of completely writing it off that it would never ever be good again or worth any of my time, even though I'd already spent money on it and didn't get a refund. There's just, there's no reason to stop yourself from having fun. If you're mad, write an angry review. If you can get a refund, get it. But if you have this product that you've paid money for, you should try to have fun with it. And I think that's something that culturally, and I know for myself, I've gotten worse about that over years, and I'm trying to reconnect with having fun. And so that sort of like finding ways to have fun rather than looking for ways to shut yourself down from having fun and be a critic instead, is a great way to start enjoying yourself in the things that you're trying to do to enjoy yourself. For now though, I have a bigger video project to work on. Good luck, have fun, Limbless out.